A few days ago here in the United States, we celebrated July the 4th, and I didn't send this video out at that time just because, especially in the circles of internet marketing and online business, there's so many, quote, sales going on to help people get their freedom that actually the product is not the first step in freedom. The first step in freedom is actually declaring that and determining exactly what freedom means to you. And that's really what this video is about, to help you get to that point, to really declare it for yourself. First and foremost, that's exactly what our founding fathers did when they signed the Declaration of Independence, saying that all men are created equal, that there is a right for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, all of this came about because of the desire for a seven-letter word. In fact, it's the same seven-letter word that the people who first came to this country wanted: freedom. That's what they wanted more than anything else. Now, it began with the first settlers of wanting freedom of religion, and that was their primary focus. And certainly, I am not a historian. I'm not going to go into all the history of the country, but this is a seven-letter word that has surrounded our country for hundreds of years and certainly surrounds our lives today. People who are starting online business, first and foremost, seem to be wanting more than anything freedom. Now, here's what we're going to cover in this video: let freedom ring, the price of freedom, and the freedom formula. Well, Native Americans lived in freedom until the colonists came. And colonists lived in freedom until the rules changed. Well, freedom loses when an outside force decides to control you against your will. And that's the story of almost every nation and every people. There's always been freedom lost because of outside control. That's what slavery has been about for thousands of years. And yet freedom is what's prized. Freedom is what we ultimately pursue, being able to do what we want, when we want, and hopefully not to the detriment of other people. But throughout history, freedom has always cost someone. And it's a sad part of the story, and it's a sad part of the history, quite honestly. But good old King George III decided that those folks over in America couldn't do what they wanted when they wanted, so he started to exercise some control. Now, the Founding Fathers called this tyranny, and of course, those who were on their side were being called treasonous. They were pulling back from Great Britain and ultimately could lose their very lives over this. Now, when this fight began, it was not the fight of the majority as most people think. It was actually the fight of a minority. They were labeled revolutionists, rebels, patriots, and the opposing view, even here on this soil, were called the loyalists, and that by far was the majority. When a person begins fighting for freedom, it usually begins with one idea or a small group of people. Rarely is freedom pursued by the majority. And the same thing is true today. That's why there are so many employees as opposed to entrepreneurs and business owners. It's always easier to be under the rule of thumb than to actually pursue freedom. So the Founding Fathers began to write, and they put this together. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this began a little more than a year after the actual war began. And why the war began? Because more than anything of the oppression of Great Britain through the desire to make a profit, to tax those on this soil even more than the inhabitants thought was fair. And this came about primarily because of the French and Indian War, the battle that was waged, and the cost, the debt that was incurred because of that war led Great Britain to tax the colonists even more heavily. And because of that, they ultimately revolted and decided, we're just not going to do this. This is no way this is going to happen. But the bottom line is, freedom is good and tyranny is bad. The colonists began singing "We're Not Going to Take It," later made popular by Twisted Sister, if you want to look up those lyrics. And the greatest anthem came in the form of the Declaration of Independence. And as I mentioned earlier, this is really an act of treason. When those who signed this declaration put their names on it, if there had not been a victory, they would have lost. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all the heroes of the early days would have all been executed. Especially John Hancock. He signed his name, the biggest, most say, so that when the enemy came, they would recognize him by his signature, that he was not hiding behind anything. But all of the leaders of this country, when we think back to that time period of the 1700s, well, they would have been executed if Great Britain had won. So it was a declaration of wrongs committed, and it was a declaration of freedom. If you ever read the Declaration of Independence, usually we stop after the first couple of paragraphs. But when you read the actual declaration of what they were seeking freedom from, it's pretty amazing the accusations that were made against King George III and Great Britain. Now, just because the paper was signed did not make the king give up. It's not enough to simply declare freedom and to say we're not going to take it and this is our new route. That just made the battle that much rougher, that much stronger. And there is a price for freedom. Freedom is not free, but instead it cost a lot of people their lives. The war escalated, over 50,000 dead and wounded. Now, this is not a great number compared to the Civil War, World War I, or World War II, but in that time, with the number of inhabitants on this shore, that was a great number of people and a tremendous loss. Again, freedom is not free. Just because we decide that we want freedom, it's not free, and it's not necessarily easy. There's always a cost, and we've got to be familiar with that so that we don't declare our freedom and think that now that we've made the declaration, now that we've said that we want to be free, it's all downhill from here. Actually, the Declaration of Freedom, the Declaration of Independence, is really the beginning for the battle to escalate, because there's always going to be people who do not want freedom. There are going to be the ones who love the comfort afforded, even though there might be heavy taxation or heavy burdens. There is comfort from not having to take the risk. Now, I remember when I first got started in business. I come from an education family. All of my folks thought I was crazy. The most anyone had ever really made in our family was maybe $30,000, $35,000 a year. That was it. And to launch out on my own, to do my own thing, well, that was insane. It was unheard of. It was risky. It certainly was not safe, and it was not secure. So I had to listen to those around me who said, this is crazy. You need to get a nice job. Because that's where safety was found for so many years. Now, today, because of the economy, it doesn't seem as safe as it always was. But that was really what was taught. It's the way that I was raised, and many people around me were raised in the same way. And so freedom's not free. To start a business, it's not free. To go forward and learn and to educate yourself in order to take the risk to find freedom and to declare yourself free is not free. So it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. So the freedom formula: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's really the freedom formula. And you're going to be doing this as an exercise here in just a few minutes. But I want you really to concentrate on this. And I want to share what these things mean to me, so that maybe it'll be a little bit of a catalyst for you. And if you've never done this exercise, if you've never written these things down, I really encourage you to do it. Not on your computer, but actually get out a sheet of notebook paper or a notebook or a yellow legal pad or whatever you like to write on. Find a quiet place and to write down your Declaration of Independence. Well, life, what does that really mean? What's it going to mean to you? To me, life was shaped by an event like it is for so many people. And it was not necessarily a positive event, but it was an earth-shattering event. Anyone who's been on my list for a while knows that A little more than 17 years ago now, my first wife passed away. She literally died in my arms. And every time I look at my oldest son, I'm reminded of Sherry. I'm reminded of the day that she died. I'm reminded of the day that my life took a tremendous turn when suddenly, in the middle of loss, as so many of us discover, in the middle of loss, is when I found what was most important. And it was in that moment and the years after that where I made a vow that freedom for me was to enjoy life with family and friends. Because ultimately, all we have at the end of the day, at the end of life, is for people to be able to look back and say, this is what I remember. And it's usually a funny moment. It's a serious moment. It's a quote. It's an experience. But I tell you what, I've rarely been to a funeral when someone started sharing about how hard someone worked and that was the extent of their life. It was always something about good times, about memories shared. And so in the middle of that loss of losing Sherry was I decided that I was not going to miss any of my kids' school events. That I was not going to miss their sports events or any plays or theater that they might be in or any chorus activities. I was not going to miss that. Maybe I was going to be the only dad that went on these field trips at school, but I was going to be there. I was not going to allow someone else to tell me when I could or could not spend time with my family. Now, that's what life means to me. It doesn't have to be that for you, but that was my definition. So it began to be part of my catalyst, part of my movement to make sure that what I did to earn income, to earn a living, did not change life. Instead of allowing income and a living to dictate what life was going to be, I chose life first. Now, it doesn't mean that there haven't been struggles. It doesn't mean that there aren't times where work has not intervened. But for the most part, I've been able to keep that vow of independence, that declaration of life, true for about the last, I'd say about 15 years or so. So what's life mean to you? Liberty. What's it mean to be free? Now, understand that we've got to be careful with the word liberty, because when we start talking about freedom, we start thinking that we're going to do what we want when we want. But to me, liberty means that we get to enjoy life. We get to do what we want when we want, as long as it does not harm other people. So I want to be able to have the freedom to do things. Now, liberty is beyond doing what I want when I want, obviously. But it means the freedom from debt or freedom from worry financially. And I tell you what, those are always when you decide that you're going to live a life of freedom. You're now in control of that income. It shifts your perspective like crazy when the check has to come in because of your effort rather than it just arriving. There's a lot of pressure with that. But there's also the freedom that comes with it as well. To be able to choose how you are going to work and when you are going to work so that those around you can receive a blessing from that. It means that if you decide, like me, to get up early in the morning and work and take off later in the day, you've got the freedom to do that. Or if you decide that you want to work later in the day, you've got the freedom to do that as well. Life and liberty, they go hand in hand. They're really joined. You don't really want one without the other. You want them to flow together. And then the pursuit of happiness. You know, this sounds a little bit selfish when you read that in the Declaration of Independence. What does it mean to pursue happiness? Well, it can be selfish or it can be extremely giving. I think among all of us, one thing that makes us really happy is when we're able to give gifts to other people, when we're able to give to a charitable organization, or as I just got back from visiting an orphanage in Peru just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm about to head out in another couple of weeks and go down to Mexico to work with an orphanage down there. To me, that's pursuing happiness. To feed an orphan is happiness. To be able to take your family on a pretty cool trip is happiness. But it's not the pursuit of stuff. It's not the pursuit of materialism. It's not the pursuit of acquisitions. It's simply the pursuit of happiness. Often we think about in business of how big we want something to be and how much money we want to make, and we see all of these advertisements for the cars and the yachts and all this stuff. Well, that's the pursuit of stuff. But we've all found that there's been times where we might have had plenty in our life, but we did not have happiness in our life. So certainly happiness is not defined by gear or materialism or having enough junk. But ultimately, it's defined by the impact of our lives on the lives of those around us. And so as you make your declaration of independence, write these things down. What is life to you? What is liberty to you? What is happiness to you? So how will you break the chains if you are indeed chained by now and don't feel like you've got life to the full and liberty to the full and happiness to the full? Well, you begin by making sure that you start with your declaration. You don't begin by deciding, okay, this is what I'm going to do to make money. You begin by saying, this is what I'm going to do to live. This is what freedom is to me. And then you begin to design a business that allows you to stay true to your declaration. I'm proud to be an American. Do we do everything right? No. Do we have a lot of issues and a lot of problems and things in our government that need to change? Yes. But I'm excited about the opportunity and the freedom that does exist to go after life, to go after liberty, and go after happiness. Please do this exercise today. Please write your declaration today so that you can begin to design your online business in a way that will give you the things that you declare. As always, success is not an accident. Be blessed today.